Hi, it's Danielle Radoichin, and this is In Talks With, a series of bite-sized chats about culture from lockdown and beyond. My guest on this episode, recorded on 27th of April 2020, is Maryam Eisler, who has been in conversation with fellow artists including Marina Abramovic and Shireen Nishat during the COVID-19 pandemic, asking them to contribute thoughts and ideas as part of her Confined Artists Free Spirits project, which is on the Lux magazine online platform and further supported by Photo London, ArtNet and Tristan Hall. I spoke to her about the response to COVID from the art world, if and why there is a need for art at this time, and how galleries will survive. Maryam Eisler, hello.
Hello, Danielle. How are you?
I'm very well. Welcome to the In Talks With podcast. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, even though I sadly can't see you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real honor to be on your program. Thank you.
So you're based in London and I'm based in London, but the reason we can't be together in the same place is because of we are in the midst of the corona pandemic of 2020. But I wanted to speak to you and hear a bit about what you're up to, because I noticed from your Instagram account mainly that you've been doing some really interesting things. I should mention that you're an artist, a photographer. Do you want to mention a bit about the kind of work you do?
Yes, of course. My photography, the crux of it, the thematics in which I'm really interested um, and explore quite often is the topic of the sublime feminine, the female energy and the female form. I look at it from different angles, whether it be mother with a capital M or Mother Nature, or a woman as temptress, woman as creator, woman as creative. And so I really, and I love to explore this theme by placing this female energy and female form in big nature, which is why my travels and journeys of exploration have taken me to um, the big skies and big nature of, in the form of deserts of New Mexico, the western front of America, Provence, and quarries, stone quarries that have been abandoned, Iceland, which is very much a landscape which, in anyone's mind, kind of resembles almost what life on Earth would have been at origin with a capital O. And so, in a way, I'm constantly searching for Eve, in a sense, which was in fact the title of my first public show at the Tristan Hore Gallery in London 4 years ago. And I have been photographing for 25 or so years. I just never really had the opportunity or, frankly, the courage to go out there and show my work publicly until 4 years ago, when sort of a series of happenstance moments happened, and there we go. 4 years later, now my wings are unclipped, and I'm able to share my thoughts and feelings and emotions with the greater public, and I'm really very grateful for that. So it's been a really fun adventure so far.
You say there was a series of things that gave you the courage to become an artist or to show your work publicly. What was the main? What if you had to describe the main thing of those? What would that be?
I guess we're all, honestly, I'm a great believer that we all of us, each and every one of us, have a creative streak, and it's just a question of, when and how to tap into that, and where, when, and how, and at what moment in one's life one can find the courage to actually share those inner thoughts, because that's really what it is. Any form of art production, whether it be photography in my case or painting, at the end of the day, it's a personification, a materialization, concretization of your inner thoughts and your inner emotions. And so, when is it that you feel comfortable to do that? And in my case, it's been sort of lingering in my head, honestly, since childhood. Photography has. I left Iran in '78 under somewhat strenuous circumstances due to a revolution which took place in my country in '78, and we moved to France. The flip side, the positive flip side, was that I ended up living in Paris. So, of course, you grow up with, all that culture and cultural heritage, and going to museums and galleries every weekend. And I remember one of my first very memorable shows uh, by Man Ray at the Centre Pompidou, which really really marked and etched a sort of a corner of my brain, and that's I would say possibly when my initial interest in photography took place. And then life takes you on, and in more recent years, in the last 10 years particularly, I've had the pleasure of collaborating on a number of book titles which have been focused on creativity and artists and their studios. And they're big tomes, which we've published with Thames and Hudson. And I would say that overall, I've probably seen about maybe 500 studios in the last 500, 5 years or so. And so, by definition and by consequence, when you spend so much time with artists, exploring and digging their psyches, their brains, their practices, their studios, you tend to kind of get really almost impregnated with their thoughts. And it's kind of on the job learning. I didn't go to art school. I didn't even study art history, for God's sake. I did an MBA and degree, undergraduate degree in the US for political science. But I think this has been the best education I've had, on the job for these publications. And somehow, I suppose your brain just takes it all in, like a sponge. And at some point after 10 years, this whole mishmash of information and artistic production sort of led, in a way, I suppose, has had great influence on my own output and my own production. So I'm really grateful for the opportunities that I've been given over the last 10 years. And it's been, really a very enchanting portion of my life, which, it's been a very, and also very revelatory, because by doing these explorations, you also, on many levels, I think you're exploring your own sense of self or self identity, and trying to see where you fit in all this, and what defines you as a person, and what makes you tick, what makes you wake up, what leads you, what your passions are, what your inspirations are. And so and then you just produce, and that's the golden moment. Now, whether that production is good or bad, that's for others to decide. It's a very selfish process. It's a very lonely process, because you're doing it on your own. You don't necessarily bounce ideas back and forth, because it's your own ideas coming and to being materialized. But I know for myself, I've had a great deal of fun doing it, and you can only just hope that others will appreciate it as well. And that also in the process you've done something contributive, for the world. So you've added some beauty, some thought, and some, created a form of dialogue with others who've potentially explored the same thematics as you over time and over history. So
Now, I want to talk to you about this project you've been doing since the coronavirus enforced caused this lockdown to happen. Confined artists, free spirits,
yes, correct.
which has been commissioned by Lux magazine, for which you're a contributing editor. Tell me a bit about that.
Yes, so I woke up, I guess it was close to about a month ago, April 1st, and I thought to myself, well, we're in lockdown mode. I better sort of switch on some sort of creative vibe in my head and see what I can do. And, it originally stemmed from a bit of boredom, frankly. And then I said, well, what sort of assets do I have? And my assets are people, because that's who I enjoy, and that's what I like collecting, interesting people. That's who I've met, over the last sort of 10 years, as I said, with the making of the books. And so I've developed all these wonderful friendships with artists along the way, and have obviously, as a result, their contact details and so forth. So I decided to contact these people and put my own skill to work, which is photography, except obviously because of social distancing guidelines and problems of lack of travel possibility and so forth. So I decided to photograph them by WhatsApp or FaceTime in the context of their home or their studios. So that would be the portrait side of the project. And I would ask them, and still continue to ask them, for a paragraph of thoughts, their thoughts as artists in this current time. And, in all times of history when the world has gone through discord and tension, war, and so forth, artists have always had interesting commentary to add to the dialogue. And I feel that this is also that moment. So
And from talking to all these artists who are very much at the forefront of the art world, what's the sense you get, and are there any themes emerging of the collective artistic response to this moment?
it's very interesting that you asked that question, because I was actually sitting down and looking at all the responses before I spoke to you. And there are some big themes. Some artists are looking at it from a very private, personal perspective. Others are looking at the situation from a much more, shall we say, global, philosophical, conceptual perspective. And there are things like, for instance, Hassan Hajjaj, who's based in London, talks about how his priorities have changed. His priorities of yesterday are no longer those of today, and he placed all his emphasis on health, home, and love. You have people like Emilia Kabakov and Michael Craig Martin, for instance, who very much are looking at the inequalities, the emphasis of inequalities that have taken place, especially with communities which are poorer or migrants. Emilia talks about, having to create a new boat of tolerance. These are the words that are being used. Um, you have, Japanese artist Mariko Mori, who's very, simple with her words, but in fact, she just used one word, which is wholeness. Mary McCartney speaks of missing touch and connection. So that's really the very looking at the very basic level of human, and what it is that makes us um, be who we are, and very much focusing on emotions on many levels. I have a artist who I admire greatly, whose photography I admire greatly, who lives in Boston, and she's of Lebanese origin, Rania Matar, who always talked about, given her background, about the great divide between them and us, the West and the East, and how this virus has become an equalizer on many levels. And in fact, she's using that time photographing friends and acquaintances in Boston through barriers, through doors, through windows, and yet maintaining. And, if you look at her photographs, you would see that the connection is still there. So, how to maintain an emotional, um, heartfelt, soulful connection with your subject matter despite the imposed barriers. Um, Others are very much talking about their concern for frontline workers. Whether it be in America or on this end. Um, you have Richard Phillips, for instance, being one in New York. He's in the heart of New York City. He himself suffered a great deal from COVID 19, as did his girlfriend. And he talks about, the sound of the sirens, the fear, what he himself went through, and his uh, incredible, gratefulness towards the frontline workers and the hospital workers. Glenn Ligon is an interesting character because he speaks about something that you really wouldn't expect him to be talking about, which is cooking, and how these types of moments in history or time or in one's personal life enables you or empowers you to try something new. And, he obviously did not view himself as a chef or a cook, but he's experimenting all these new wonderful recipes. Um, Joel Mesler, who's based in East Hampton, wonderful artist who happens to also be a gallerist. So he wears a dual hat, which is something not very many people do. Just provided one work of art, and on the work of art it says "one day at a time." Laurie Simmons speaks about the impact of solitude and her concern for that. Shirin Nishat speaks about a ground zero, which is basically, again, this equalizing um, effect of the virus on the whole artistic community, and how um, we are all at ground zero, having to look at things, again. from scratch, and also her great focus on nature and how the little things like a bird's chant or a bristle moving just really enchant her on many levels. And Idris Khan, wrote something beautiful, which I wanted to read to you along those lines with nature. And he says, I find myself reading repetition, writing it down over and over again. Birds' beaks humming at the window, leaves flickering as a shadow, the way hope builds a home. So, as you can see, there's all kinds of things really being submitted. Um, I have a wonderful artist who, believe it or not, I discovered on the internet, on Instagram. And he's just a wonderful poet of words and photography at the same time. And his name is Henry Lohmeyer. And he says to me, he says, Hi, Maryam. It seems sad, but it's what I'm feeling. I hurt most days. Do you? I listen to songs, a lot of James Taylor and Jackson Brown. You know how lines haunt? Mine has always been from the song These Days. Don't confront me with my failures. I've not forgotten them. I want to be held each day. I want to hold. Do you? Let's hold, just today, because I don't know what day it is. It's just today. So that's Henry. And would you like me to read you a few more that I've picked? Okay, this is Eric Fischl from his home and studio in Sag Harbor in Long Island. And he says, because I'm used to spending time alone in my studio, quarantine has not presented too big a disruption. However, what enters the studio while I'm working or daydreaming are phantoms of a different sort. They are the demons of hope and despair, and they are wreaking havoc. Hope shows up as a two headed monster, sentimentality and nostalgia. Despair slips in with his sidekick, inertia. The days go by and even progress. My paintings start out light and grow darker. I try to retrieve what light I can without being dishonest. The truth is, no one wants to be where we are right now, but we are here, and I believe this is where art and artists must stay, facing forward, dug in and willing to bear witness to our fears, vulnerability, bravery, and resolve. Paul Simon once wrote that sentimentality was aiming for the heart and missing. Alberto Mangel wrote that entertainment was a secondhand experience of the world, learning without action and fulfillment without accomplishment. This is the wisdom that is guiding me now. Eric, stay healthy, stay safe, stay away from me. So I thought this was really quite wonderful. And
Fantastic.
perhaps one more.
Yes, please.
Going to get there.
This is a book in itself, Maryam,
I'm
pulling
making
together.
one. I'm going to definitely turn this into a book. Absolutely, there's no question. There's just too much good material that's
Yeah.
coming out
Fantastic.
of people, and
And
it's
we'll have you back on
stupefying.
this podcast to tell me about that.
I'm telling you, it's so stupefying to see what people are saying. Okay, sorry. Oh, here we go. So another wonderful entry was by Richard Wentworth, who I had the pleasure of meeting a few years back with my friend Hannah Barry, and we've
I know Richard,
maintained
yeah.
a wonderful friendship since. And he was one of those guys who just jumped on board right away. And this is what he had to write. Dear Miriam, what an archaeological moment this is. Each and every one of us rummaging in history, interrogating everything we thought we ever knew, the unknowable knowns. Amidst the vast bags of secondhand things, which we all carry in our heads, language must take up most of the entrepot. At this fugitive time, it is language which seems to effloresce, all the words burning bright, vibrating against each other. Express, depress, impress, suppress, repress, compress seem to be my morning's raiding party today. Just another emotional ambush. RW, Tuesday, question mark, April 2020, which means where is time? There's a great timelessness at this moment, which we're all feeling, I think. Would you like more?
I would, but I feel like for the purposes of the podcast, we
Yeah.
should cut it there. But that's wonderful, and thank you so much for sharing
Very
those.
well.
I mean, it's just so lovely to hear different thoughts from artists, but collated into one spot through you. So thank you for sharing. That's
You're
amazing.
most welcome.
Maryam, I also wanted to talk to you briefly about what's going to happen to art galleries. You sit on many boards. You're a trustee of Whitechapel Art Gallery. You're a member of Tate's International Council, and you're on the advisory panel for the Delphina Foundation. Why are you having conversations with anyone on these boards at this time, and have there been discussions about what's going to happen to some of these institutions moving forward after what's been going on around COVID-19?
So I co-chaired with my dear friend Maya Rassamni the Middle East Acquisition Committee at the Tate for 10 years, and we just stepped down, both of us, in favor of another dear friend, Maria Sukar, who's taken on the helm of this committee. And I also sat on the board of the Whitechapel Gallery for 5 years and just stepped down a few months back. But of course, they're my family, and I'm incredibly close to them. Obviously, we have ongoing conversations, and I'm very involved with both institutions, even if I don't sit on their boards anymore. Um, I think, regardless of discussion and conversation or not, what really matters is the importance of artistic institutions and their preservation. In fact, in my project with Lux magazine, Isaac Julian was one, in fact, the only one who expressed a great deal of concern about what we should all do as a community to save and make sure that the sovereignty of these institutions are preserved. And I tend to agree with him, and I think that should be, a great concern to us all, because they, at the end of the day, are the vessels of our collective memory. That's these types of institutions that carry our cultural heritage, contain our cultural heritage in the case of institutions that actually hold collections like the Tate. And they will be suffering a great deal, both from the government side, of course, because priorities of the government will no doubt will be changed after this historic, critical time in history. But also from a private side, funding that would normally come from private individuals or private foundations. Those schemes, I think, unfortunately, will be greatly affected because individuals will be greatly affected. Their wealth will be greatly affected, their investments. And so, really, the landscape is unfortunately quite, dark and bleak in my view. And we should all come together and do all that we can to support our institutions in the best possible way. And well, if it means programmatically speaking, if it means fewer exhibitions for a while, then I suppose you have to look at it positively and say that emphasis will be placed on quality rather than quantity. But I think that we should all do our fair share to support our institutions. Not to mention, of course, priority should be health, and of course, priority should be frontline doctors and hospitals. There's no question about that. Um, but we should not underestimate, in my view, the effect of this virus on the mental health of people. The effect that it has on people who are alone, on solitude, on people who are stuck inside homes, families who kind of climb on each other's heads, children who don't go to school, the pressures on parents, and so forth. And so I think artistic institutions and museums, when we come out of this, will play a very important role in the restoration and rebalancing and harmonizing of people's emotions and feelings. And I think, as such, even though they may not be priority per se, I think we should really look at them quite seriously and support them.
Well, Maryam Eisler, thank you so much for talking to me today. And it's been really interesting to hear your thoughts. And thank you also especially for sharing those lovely notes from artists.
Danielle, it's been a real pleasure participating in your program. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Radoichin. The sound and theme music were by Wargi Productions, and the artwork is by Patrick Waugh. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. And of course, please do subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for listening.